Section 2. The first emperor notices Li Si's excessive retinue, a classic case of ruler-minister conflict. 第二节，秦始皇查理斯车骑过剩，君臣权力冲突的经典个案。The tense relationship between imperial and chancellor power in the Qin is most classically and directly illustrated by the incident of Li Si's retinue, recorded in records of the Grand Historian, Annals of the First Emperor of Qin. On one occasion, the first emperor climbed Mount Liang Palace and looked out, seeing Chancellor Li Si accompanied by an excessively large, imposing, and grandly ceremonial retinue. The emperor immediately showed displeasure and deep dissatisfaction, expressing to his attendants vigilance and resentment toward Li Si's overweening influence. One of the attendants secretly informed Li Si of the emperor's anger. Terrified, Li Si drastically reduced his retinue, lowered ceremonial standards, and deliberately restrained his power. The next day, when the emperor again saw Li Si's much diminished entourage, he immediately realized that someone nearby had leaked his words and communicated with Li Si. Enraged, he ordered all attendants present that day executed without exception. This incident directly reveals the essence of the Qin dynasty. Imperial power was absolutely supreme, tolerating no challenge to its authority. Even powerful chancellor power stood entirely unprotected under the violent deterrence of the throne. Tianyu Qing, Studies in the History of the Qing, Han, Wei, and Jin Dynasties, 1993, p. 28. The first emperor used extreme means to uphold exclusive imperial dignity, eliminating all space for trust between ruler and minister, marking the Qin system's descent into pure violent centralization. Lin Jianming, History of the Qing and Han Dynasties, 1989, p. 157. Seemingly trivial, the incident profoundly reveals the dual nature of Qin politics. First, Qin chancellor power was indeed weighty and prestigious enough to arouse deep ruler vigilance and suspicion, becoming the strongest political force outside imperial authority. Second, imperial power was absolute and unchallengeable, brooking no private communication or overflow of power. The ruler's suppression, suspicion, and precaution toward chancellor power reached an extreme. Between ruler and minister, there was no trust, no covenant, no custom, only naked power struggle and violent intimidation. Section 10. Qianmu's definitive judgment. The Qin marked the beginning of autocracy. Han, Tang, and Song cannot be lightly labeled autocratic. 第三节前目定论，秦为专制开端，汉唐宋不可轻言专制。Regarding the essence of Qin politics, Qianmu put forward a core thesis in traditional Chinese government and politics that became a classic benchmark in political history. Among the six dynasties Qin, Han, Tang, Song, Ming, Qing only Qing, Ming, and Qing can clearly be called monarchic autocracy. The Han, Tang, and Song dynasties must never be hastily labeled autocratic. The Qin dynasty, with exclusive legalism, arbitrary imperial power, abolition of feudalism, introduction of commanderies and counties, burning of books and burying of scholars, suppression of public opinion, elimination of aristocracy, and abolition of public deliberation, allowed monarchical power free from institutional, customary, public or aristocratic constraint. It truly marked the historical beginning of Chinese monarchic autocracy, representing a complete break from the balancing traditions of the Shang and Zhou and the public deliberative traditions of the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. Qianmu, Traditional Chinese Government and Politics, 1955, p. 12. The Qin system established the principle of absolute and exclusive imperial authority, ending the pre-Qin pattern of pluralistic checks and launching a long-term trend of political centralization in China. Yan Buke, Peaks and Valleys, 2009, p. 81, 第4章，汉代政治理性向权鼎盛与盐铁会议的准制宪会议事件。Chapter 2, Political Rationality in the Han Dynasty, the zenith of chancellor power and the quasi-constitutional practice of the Salt Iron Conference. 第一节，汉初独相体制，丞相总百魁的权力格局。Section E, the single chancellor system in the early Han, the power structure of the chancellor as head of all bureaucracy. The Han dynasty inherited the Qin institutional framework, yet it did not fully adopt the latter's logic of extreme autocracy. Instead, it restored multiple constraints including chancellor power, public opinion, aristocratic influence, and scholar official oversight within the structure of imperial authority, returning to political rationality and balanced power. The early Han employed a single chancellor system in which the chancellor, as head of all officials and core of administration, oversaw national governance, official appointments and dismissals, rewards and punishments, finance and civil administration, as well as judicial trials. The office enjoyed immense power and eminent status, and the emperor was obliged to respect chancellor authority adequately, forming a relatively stable balance between monarch and ministers. Early Han chancellors such as Xiao He, Cao Shen, Chen Ping, and Zhou Bo were able to use chancellor power to restrain imperial authority, correct royal errors, uphold institutions, and preserve established conventions. Chancellor power thus became the most important institutional check outside imperial authority, and the Han was by no means a replica of Qin absolutism. The early Han saw the zenith of chancellor power, which effectively constrained imperial authority, making joint rule by monarch and ministers the political norm. Zhuzongbing, a study of the prime minister system in the Han, Wei, Jing, Northern and Southern dynasties, 1990 p. John. 45. Han chancellor power enjoyed institutional safeguards and maintained a stable balance with imperial authority, marking the golden age of the prime minister system in ancient China. Yan Gengguang, the Chinese prime minister system, 1985 p. 31. 第二节盐铁会议的限制意义。文献原文：中外学者共识与不成文规则的确立。Section R: The constitutional significance of the Salt-Iron Conference. Original texts, scholarly consensus in China and abroad, and the establishment of unwritten rules. The historical significance of the Salt-Iron Conference far exceeded short-term policy adjustments and economic debates. It stands as a landmark event of profound constitutional value in ancient Chinese political civilization. In the 6th year of the Shi Yuan reign of Emperor Zhao of Han, 81 BCE, the court issued an imperial edict summoning the chancellor, the imperial secretary, and worthy scholars and literary talents recommended by commanderies and kingdoms to discuss state affairs and inquire about the sufferings of the people. This grand court-country debate was compiled by Huan Quan as Discourses on Salt and Iron and is clearly recorded in Annals of Emperor Zhao, Treatise on Food and Commerce, and Biography of Huo Guang in the History of the Han Dynasty, representing a rare political practice in the imperial era, policy determined through open debate, power constrained by public discourse, and fundamental principles established through the Daotong moral orthodox tradition. Annals. O.F. Emperor Zhao states plainly, in the 2nd month of the 6th year of Shi Yuan, an imperial edict ordered officials to consult worthy scholars and literary talents recommended by commanderies and kingdoms on the people's hardships, and to discuss the abolition of the salt, iron, and liquor monopolies. Huan Quan wrote in Discourses on Salt and Iron, Basic Arguments 1. In the 6th year of Shi Yuan, an imperial edict ordered the chancellor and imperial secretary to confer with the recommended worthy scholars and literary talents, inquiring into the people's hardships. During the conference, the worthy scholars and literary talents invoked Confucian classics to speak on behalf of the people, directly addressing the fundamental boundaries of state power. In Basic Arguments, the scholars clearly argued, I have heard that the way to govern the people is to block the sources of excess and dissipation, broaden the foundation of moral virtue, restrain profit, seeking secondary pursuits, and promote benevolence and righteousness. Do not display profit as a lure. Only then can moral education flourish and customs be transformed. Today, commanderies and kingdoms operate salt, iron, and liquor monopolies and the equitable transport system, competing for profit with the people. This dissipates the simple integrity of the people and fosters a culture of greed and baseness. Thus, few among the common people return to fundamental agriculture, while many rush to secondary profit-seeking. Discourses on Salt and Iron, Forbidden Ploughing further puts forward a core constitutional principle. The resources of mountains and seas, wealth of great marshes, these are the treasures of all under heaven. They ought to belong to the imperial household department. Your Majesty, not appropriating them for private use, has entrusted them to the Ministry of Agriculture to relieve the people's urgent needs. These arguments elevated the ideals that all resources under heaven are public instruments, that the state must not compete for profit with the people, and that power must be grounded in the people's livelihood to fundamental principles transcending administrative convenience and imperial will, possessing distinct quasi-constitutional normative force. In academic research, scholars including Su Fuguan, Qian Mu, Yan Buke, Yu Yingxi, Yang Liangsheng, and Gejiangxiong have reached broad consensus at UNANIMOUSLY, identifying the Salt Iron Conference as the political practice in ancient China that most closely resembles a constitutional convention with irreplaceable constitutional functions and historical status. Xu Fuguan clearly states in Thoughts of the Han Dynasty,